This is Aston Martin's latest model in their latest lineup. It's their Halo car, and I'd like you to welcome the brand new DBS Superleggera. Now, design-wise, it is undeniably striking. You can tell from the moment you set your eyes on it, you look upon it, you see that the design is meant to give a more brutish feel. It has been widened, it's been given a much longer and sleek type of arrow-pointed shape to it, so it makes it look much more like a Super GT that it's meant to be. Now, talking about design, we see the headlights have become a little more sleek compared to the DB11. They have a much more aggressive tone to them. The front grille is massive, very comparable to the Vantage AMR Pro from the previous generation. And having a big grille can be a bit too much to some people. However, it's really good to keep this car planted when air channels through and gives it downforce, as well as to cool up the engine. The front splitter at the bottom here is carbon fiber. So firstly, carbon fiber has been implemented into this car a lot to reduce weight, so now it's 70 kilos lighter compared to the DB11. However, it is 40 kilos heavier compared to the DB11 V8. However, this car did need a V12 since it's meant to be Aston Martin's Halo car. So having that V12 really gives it a lot of power, and having these arches, these big grills, the front splitter and the carbon fiber all come together to give it a Super GT feel. Now, let's move up the car, starting from the bonnet. Now, the bonnet, you do see these massive vents. These vents are meant to cool the engine, give the engine room to breathe so it doesn't overheat and such. When air flows through the front grille, it will come out through here and of course flow through the car, help cooling it and giving it downforce. Something that's a little bit of a gimmick, there is the Superleggera badge put onto here. It does look nice. Superleggera is meant to mean super light in Italian. However, obviously the car isn't too light. It's basically just a little bit of a gimmick in my opinion. Now, moving on to the sides, we see that all the arches just flow through really nicely, and then air will just channel through underneath this spoiler where the mirrors are planted. So air will just channel through here, come all the way back to the rear in here and into these vents and slits. So these vents will help channel air through, and basically it will help the car be much more aerodynamically sound and much more planted when there's downforce and when you're moving at high speeds. Now, the wheels are 21-inch Y-spoke wheels. So why they're called the Y-spoke wheels is because, as you can see, this Y shape coming all the way to the center from the basically edges of the wheels give it a more sleek web design. So on the DBS Superleggera, the sleek web design just helps it contrast, making it look more sporty and much more like an aggressive car. As well as the carbon ceramic brakes help you with giving you a lot of brake power. So when you're going at high speeds, you're going to need a lot of brake power, and these brakes don't overheat since they're carbon ceramic, and they will stop you where you are. You won't have to worry about not being able to stop in time. So basically it all comes together when you have a Super GT like this. Moving on to the side vents. These side vents are similar to the DB11. They're meant for cooling the wheel arches and just flowing air through it and out to the side. As well as you have some badging like we saw with the Superleggera on the front bonnet. So all this just comes together to give it a more unique Aston Martin feel to the car. So like I mentioned, the car has been widened compared to the DB11. So you can tell in the rear arches that the car is much wider and it looks much more muscular and beefier. So that just gives it a more muscular tone and a more Super GT tone. Now, before this, I mentioned that the air channels through the rear quarter window when it goes through the spoilers of the wing mirrors. So when it channels through the quarter window, it will basically channel all the way through the car and come out this rear vent here. So it's similar to the DB11. However, DB11 has an active aerodynamics wing. So when you're going at high speeds, the wing will pop up. But however, with this one, you do see that there is a fixed carbon fiber wing. So the carbon fiber wing makes it look much more sporty, and since it's a Super GT, you want to have that sporty feel to the car. Now, when it comes to the rear's design, Aston Martin has mentioned that they want to make each car in this lineup unique. So compared to the Vantage and DB11, this car has a much sleeker and much more narrow rear taillight. It is similar to the Vantage, as with it just going through the whole rear bonnet. However, it doesn't have any nooks like the Vantage has due to the size and the shape of its bonnet. So it looks much more sleek, much sportier for the Super GT. And Aston Martin has also opted for lettering when it comes to their badge. So instead of having the Aston Martin wings, they have just put in the letters. They've increased the size and just placed them back here due to the fact that, as you can see, there isn't much more space. And doing this, in my opinion, gives it a much more modern and classier tone. Now, moving on much lower, we see that the rear diffuser is completely carbon fiber. So that is obviously something that we expect from Aston Martin with their Super GT. It's carbon fiber, so it's much lighter, much more aggressive, and gives the car basically much more weight reduction. And when it comes to the rear diffuser, you can see that it's very aggressive. So it channels the air from the front, like I mentioned, under the car, and then comes out back here and just flows all the way up. And it obviously has the rear quad exhaust, and the quad exhausts really sound much better compared to all the other generations and the previous lineups of Aston Martin. And Aston Martin does say that this is one of their fastest road production cars to date. Now, since this is a GT car, a lot of people will be wondering, how much boot space do you have? How much storage capacity do you have in the rear boot? Now, to open up the rear boot, we are going to use this method, opening it up through the rear. A small button right there, and as you can see, there is quite a bit of capacity to store, as Aston Martin basically claims. They say that you can store a set of golf clubs. Now, that is quite a decent amount. However, if you don't have enough here, you can use the 2 seats in the inside, since it's a 2x2 setup in this car. And now, let's take a peek under the bonnet. So, as you can tell, it opens up just like the DB11. It opens up outwards rather than upwards, and basically just like a normal engine. And the front bonnet, the whole segment, is made out of carbon fiber to reduce weight, as with the whole car. The engine itself isn't that different to the DB11. It's still a 5.2 litre twin turbocharged V12. However, it is much more powerful. It's able to produce 715 brake horsepower at 6,500 RPMs, and it's able to produce 900 Newton meters of torque to the rear wheels at 5,000 RPMs. Performance figures other than that are that it's able to reach a max speed of 340 kilometers per hour, and 0 to 100 is just 3.4 seconds. So all that just gives this car magnificent and very, very powerful amounts of power. Now, before I close up the bonnet, I'd like to mention a feature that I really like about both the DBS and the DB11. When you look at the wheel arches, you can see the car's tire in all its glory. So the massive tires are right there, and you can also see these slits that we talked about. So like the DB11, these slits are what channel all the hot air in the wheel arches to flow out of the wheel arches and help cool it. So you can just see how they're implemented into the bodywork, and it looks very nice. Now, as for the closing of the bonnet, this does have this soft touch close, so you just have to push it into place and it'll do the rest. Now, the DBS does have a disadvantage, and that is in its interior. The interior is basically the same as the DB11. So for a car of this caliber, some people might find that as a letdown. However, I assume Aston Martin was looking to perfect the performance as well as the design aspects, and they really did a magnificent job with it. Now, interior-wise, all the same setup is in there. You've got all the same buttons in the center console. You've got the Daimler setup from the previous AMG generations, and so on and so forth. Steering wheel-wise, it's also very sporty, just like the Vantage. And the only difference that I can see in this car when it comes to the inside is that it has a bit of a more sporty feel, especially on this one, with all the stitching and the red stitching to contrast the exterior red color, as well as this diamond-studded shape and its race seats. So it is a GT car, so it is made for comfort. However, they did implement the race seats as default, so that you feel like you're more in a Super GT compared to just an average GT like the DB11. Now, the car is obviously comfortable. It's meant to be a GT car. It also has a 2x2 setup, so you've got 2 seats in the front and 2 very small seats in the back for if you have an infant child, or just, I assume most people use it as extra storage space. So it is quite a considerate amount. Aston Martin was quite considerate with it, since it's a GT car. They decided to opt for like a similar setup to the DB11, having 2x2s. So, I mean, it's usable, however, not too usable for adults. Now, other features are that it's obviously very cozy inside. When you sit inside in the chairs, since they're race seats, they're supposed to hold you much tighter in, and just the general driving position is much nicer. It feels much more sporty, like they want to convey with the Super GT. So, to sum things up, although the interior is a bit of a letdown and not up to expectations of what people expected of their Halo car, they have still not cut corners. They have the luxurious feel of the leathers, their premium leather, their magnificent stitching to basically match the exterior, their magnificent marbled carbon fiber or weaved carbon fiber that they put here and there. So it all still feels like Aston Martin's luxurious brand. Exterior-wise, it is magnificent. It's basically very aggressive. It's beefy, it's much wider, feels very muscular. Performance also is up to standards. It's much more powerful compared to all the other Aston Martins that have been produced for the road. So in general, it's just a very magnificent car. So I hope you enjoyed our quick preview of the brand new Aston Martin DBS Superleggera. It is one of the best looking Aston Martins to date, as well as performance wise. Aston Martin has multiple times said that's their fastest road going car to this day. With that, hit that like button if you did enjoy this video, subscribe, and even follow me on Instagram for more car related content over there. Thank you for watching.